Hey, how's it going? This is Trevor with Victory Turf. In this video, we're going to be going through a mound renovation I recently did. It's the first video I've done for my business, so I'm sure it's lacking a little bit in content and quality. I just ask you to bear with me a little bit. Hopefully, it gets better with time. If you have any questions or anything else like that, feel free to comment below. You can also find me on Twitter at victory_turf, and maybe you can shoot over some pictures, whatever it may be, and hopefully we can figure out a way to help out your situation. Uh, with that being said, let's get into it. All right, getting started here. Um, Obviously, you need to have your distances pulled to be able to get the correct distance for the rubber. I always start by running a string line from the point of home plate all the way out to the second base plug, and then obviously getting the tape set up here. You'll notice in what I'm doing um, right there, I'm tearing a foot. So I'm using the 1 foot mark as zero essentially. So when I pull it to the rubber, it'll be 61 feet 6 inches. This kind of just takes out the guesswork of that little clasp kind of thing that might be off, half an inch or whatever. And then I'll also do the sides of the plate. Whereas here, I think I ended up tearing it 2 feet. Um, this allows just to make sure it's squared up. Obviously you don't want one side of the rubber an inch closer than the other. So pulling from the sides of the plate as well, and checking back between all three of those points can really make sure that everything's properly squared up and you're good to go. All right, so I jumped out here to second base. I ran this string line, like I said, from the apex of home plate right over the mound, and we're going to go straight over the top of this base plug and nail it down. Once you get it nailed in, kind of shake it out, raise it up, set it back down, just to try to straighten that string out as much as possible. And then that way we can find that true center point right over the top of the mound and get the rubber aligned properly. All right, we're jumping here to the mound. We have that string line running straight over the top, and you can kind of see there that the rubber might be a little bit off-centered. I like to measure it and find that center point. Usually the rubber is supposed to be 2 feet wide. I find it's usually just a hair short of 2 feet, so I usually mark that center point just under 1 foot, so 11 inches and 7/8 or something like that, maybe 15/16. And then from there, I pull the distance to find out where we're at so we can make some adjustments. This one happened to be right on 60 feet 6 inches. And just to circle back, I'm actually looking at 61 feet 6 inches because I tore that foot at home plate. Um, and this is a good time to mention too, I like to use the steel tape when I'm doing this. The steel tape, it's not going to have any give in it. It's metal, whereas with the nylon tape, there might be a little bit of give in there. And at the end of the day, is an eighth of an inch or half an inch make or break? No, not really, but you can really dial it in with the steel tape, and that's what I would recommend using if you can find one in your budget. All right, once we figured out where the rubber is needing to be, we can go ahead and take it out. Something I like to do when it is out of the ground is go ahead and find that nice clean edge to put towards the front. You can see here as well, this rubber has concrete in the middle. If for some reason it is empty in the center of it, I would recommend concrete's probably best. If you can't get your hands on a bag of concrete, I would just pack in clay as best as you can. Just make sure it's nice and tight. And then from there, it's just a matter of getting everything nice and flat in the bottom. Using some of that dirt we brought out and squaring it off on the bottom, tamping it down, getting it nice and firm so that rubber is not going to settle out any over time. And then we'll obviously pull these distances, make sure it's as squared up as best as possible. I've found that some rubbers kind of have bowed over time, so all three measurements might not come out perfectly from the two sides and the center. But just, use your best judgment and get it as dang near close as you can, with that 60 feet 6 inches in the center being probably the most important. And then obviously too, we have that string line coming over the top of this, going straight through the center of the rubber as kind of a final check, just to make sure everything is perfectly squared away. All right, once we're happy where the rubber is placed, what I like to do is come back with a couple 10-inch stakes and put on the back side of the rubber. I usually drive them to where the head is about 3 inches below the top of the rubber. This hopefully will bolster the position of the rubber, and as time passes, it'll want to shift back from the push off of the pitching movement, and hopefully we can keep it in place as long as possible and keep it at that 60 feet 6 inch mark. Once that's done, I'll start the backfilling process. It's pretty important to do this in lifts where you're bringing in about 3/4 of an inch to an inch of clay or new material, tamping that down, scratching it up, and then adding another lift until you get up to the top of the rubber or slightly underneath. This will prevent any settling, as it is a very important area where you don't want it to be soft or anything like that. That'll give us the best chance for it to be a nice, firm push-off area. All right, once I have that rubber nice and secured in there, what I'll do is measure off the table portion of the mound. This area is typically 3 feet by 5 feet. Sometimes I'll shrink it to 2.5 by 5 feet, depending on the actual size and diameter of the mound and just what makes sense space-wise. So don't think that it has to be 3 feet. Sometimes it can get a little tight back there on the backside if it goes all the way out to 3 feet. What you'll want to do is use that front edge of the rubber as one side of the rectangle and measure 1.5 feet off the side of the rubber. And then what I like to do is just pull it straight from the front of the rubber to the back and put a nail in at 3 feet. And this will kind of give me the general shape of where that table is going to be. All right, once we have that table defined, it's just a matter of scraping off the excess material and then adding a little bit of material if need be and getting that table built up to where it's nice and flush with the top of the rubber. From there, it's a matter of tying in the outside slopes. It's my opinion that the top table area is always what I like to do first, just because to me it's, you have that top part built and you can kind of build off of everything and tie it in all much easier. And this kind of speaks to the tamping aspect of it. When I'm tamping out that top table area, I'm only doing the top table area. I'm not going into those side slopes. I basically, if the table is in theory flat, I'm only tamping flat on that. And then if I'm doing the slopes, I keep my tamp at that angle. I'm never, have my tamp half on a different slope area and half not. I make a point of tamping either perfectly flat or at the slope of which I'm working on. And that seems to keep all the edges a lot more defined, and it gives the mound a nice clean look when you're done, and that you achieve that desired defined table much easier. All right, once you have that table area nice and squared away, the back slope tied into the grass edge nice, it's time to move to that side slope and little back quarter piece. What I do for these areas is I'll go ahead and scratch down any high spots I can find, and then using that back flat edge of the rake, I'll kind of drag it across there nice and slow, figure out where the low areas are, make some mental notes, and then add in clay to those areas, move it around a little bit, and then tamp it out. On this back quarter section, I've always found that it's kind of one of the more difficult areas to work with just because it's an awkward little piece. And that little corner there always needs a decent amount of clay added to it to get it to where it needs to be, where it'll be a nice consistent slope from that point down towards the grass. And this is another area where I would say be very deliberate in the angles at which you're tamping. So if you're on that table area, you want it flat. If you're on the sides, make sure you're tamping at that exact slope that your mound is at. If you start, tamping on those transition areas where you're on one slope in the flat part, or two sides of the slopes, and that can be a little bit hard to follow, you kind of start rounding everything off. So just try to keep everything on the plane that you're on, and you end up with a nice defined edge back there, and I think that's what looks best. All right, so we're jumping to the other side here. It's essentially a mirror of the other side as well. Just raking those edges out, trying to tie it into the grass edge as best as possible, and then working on that back corner piece, like I said, trying to maintain our angles as best as we can. This is a good time to mention as well the workability of everything. You can see how I have this pile of clay to the left of my tripod there. I was able to scratch up a lot of material from the high areas. Um, the moisture in the mound is very important. I would try to get it to a moisture content uh, going into the project where it's wet enough that it's not going to stick to the bottom of your shoes. Obviously, you don't want to make a mess and have to track stuff around, but having that moisture down in the clay really makes it where you can scratch at different angles and rake up the high stuff and get all that out of there. Where if it's bone dry, either you're not going to be able to rake it at all, or it's going to kind of chunk away in pieces, and you're just not really going to be able to be as effective shaping everything. All right, I'm jumping out here to the front side of the landing area. What I typically use here is a 6-foot level. I mark off the 1.5 through 5.5 foot spots on the level, and then from there I just measure down 1 inch. So at 18 inches or 1.5 feet out from the front of the rubber, the ground should be 1 inch below the level. At 2.5 feet out, it should be 2 inches below the level, and so forth down the slope of the mound. After making this video, I kind of realized I should probably make a closer up version of exactly this process of fixing the slope, because it kind of does pertain to the everyday maintenance of it and keeping everything dialed in. Typically when I start projects, I find that over time the whole slope area from the 1.5 foot all the way down to the 5.5 is typically built up, I'd say like an average of 2 inches to 2.5 inches high. So it ends up typically that I'm taking off material. Sometimes, in that landing spot where almost every high school pitcher is going to land, it is a little bit low, but that all the other areas are typically built up, and you can see how much material I am scraping off rather than adding up. This is a good time too to point out just the moisture in general of working on this. If the mound was rock hard, there's no way I could ever begin to just start scratching down on this clay and being able to get anything off. I'd have to use some kind of mini tiller or something like that to be able to get this loose dirt off. Sometimes in kind of extreme cases, even a shovel to be able to just chip away, big chunks to get it down to where it needs to be. You can see there too, I have a can of spray paint. What I like to do is when I have the level up and I can see my marks on the level of that 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, up to 5.5 spot, what I'll do is come out to the side of the sloped area and I'll just make tick marks. That way I'm not having to constantly put the level on and off, and I know where that, say 2, 3, and 4 are high. I know where those areas are going to be, and I can work on those, and I don't have to worry about, oh, well, 1 was low and I accidentally scraped 1 down. So I found I like to do that just to prevent any excess work that might take place. So essentially, once you get those elevations right at your 5 marks on the downslope, it's just a matter of tying everything into that 5-foot wide landing strip. So, finding the high spots, scratching them down, adding some low spots. Typically on the sides, you can kind of start rolling off. Just figuring out what you can do in terms of moving material around to get that entire landing area sloped out and kind of to a nice consistent fall down all the way towards the grass edge. All right, once we've done that front landing area, it's time to move to the sides here. All I do is take that 5-foot landing area and then take one side of it, and then I taper it from that edge straight down to the grass. It's pretty simple. All I do is take the rake. I'll move it around. Some of it you can identify just by your eyes, but taking that rake and pulling it slowly across the clay, you can see where the rake is touching the ground, where it's not touching the ground. Figure out what's high, what's low. Usually end up scratching down some areas and then moving that into some low areas and tamping it out. All right, we jump to the other side here, and we can see where those paint marks are, and we know that those are actually on the side slope. And you can see to the left there how it kind of already starts rolling off to the side. So we're going to need to build up that portion to where it matches the same slope as that 5-foot wide landing area. So what I did was I just put in a bunch of clay and just use my hand and smooth that whole section out where, like I said, we're operating on 2 different slopes there. So I built up the flat area that's going to be the landing area and then the side slope. And then, like we talked about on all the other sections, we're tamping either completely on the landing area 5-foot wide side slope, or we're completely tamping on the actual side slope. There's not any half and half area. That really creates that nice defined edge line, and it really makes it look and appear like it's a really highly maintained mound and there's no rounded portions.